Welcome again to Joe Stunner Boxing. I hope you're doing well. The sun is zooming in through the blinds. I hope you can see me. I can barely see you. Yeah, all good. Weekend's coming, so it's all good. Right. As you know, on this channel, I like to play devil's advocate, even with something I might disagree with. You know, take the opposing view, because I think you avoid slipping into echo chamber mode, or you avoid slipping into sort of what you might call pure bias. And ROLLY Romero said something that I think bears touching upon. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with it, but, you know, he said that fighters get paid too much, and as a result, they get, you know, it's the old silk pajamas routine, Marvin Hagler's famous quote, difficult to get up in the morning if you're wearing silk pajamas. And they just don't deliver. They don't deliver value for money. They don't deliver the best. They don't build on their legacies. And first of all, ROLLY also said that it should be more like the UFC. Now, that is something I totally disagree with, the UFC model, because for reasons I've gone into many times before, it's a closed shop. Fighters are told you're paid this amount, you're fighting him or her, and you're fighting on this date, and they have no say. There's no negotiation. In other words, it's a totalitarian model, which, if you have any kind of, you know, concept of fairness, quite simply is unjust. But when ROLLY said, and also when ROLLY says, you know, fighters are overpaid, the vast majority of professional boxers in the world are underpaid. What ROLLY's talking about is the top few. So the top percent or two, maybe not even that. He was referring to, you know, the sort of awful shitstorm we had last week with the Times Square card in New York and the Riyadh card. Certain fighters not making any effort, you know, Canelo plodding after Williams' Skull like an old man, Skull not even trying to win the fight, skirting around the ring, doing absolutely nothing other than sort of prodding and poking with the odd don't hit me jab. Then you had Ryan Garcia, who just didn't turn up at all. Jose Ramirez going after, again, plodding after Devin Haney. Haney not wanting to get involved at all, grabbing and holding whenever Ramirez got close. And these guys are all extremely well-paid fighters. So I think there is something to be said for the absolute elite being paid too much, especially when you consider pay-per-view. Now, I'm someone who's opposed to pay-per-view. I don't do pay-per-views. I watch it using the proverbial other means. Fight this is. I have no problem with taking a few quid out of these, in my opinion, massively overpaid elite few. The money, the wealth does not trickle down to grassroots boxing, which is the absolute, you know, the bloodstream of boxing. That's where, you know, that's what's going to attract people to come into boxing, people who don't have any, you know, a big name that they've inherited, or a top promoter looking out for them. Or, you know, if you look at, say, the sort of journeyman demographic in British boxing, you know, take away the journeyman, how can young prospects learn? You know, journeymen are guys and women who fight every other week. You know, they also hold down another job. None of this money trickles down to that grassroots thing, which is the bedrock of boxing. Okay, so yes, I do think that the top few are overpaid. I really do. And when we're talking pay-per-view, promoters and platforms will tell you, broadcasting platforms will tell you, oh, we need pay-per-view to make the fights. No, you don't. I've never believed this. If a Canelo has to take 10 million instead of 50 million and the fight is not on pay-per-view, tough titty, because 10 million quid is more than most people will earn in a lifetime. And you're getting 10, you'd still have got 10 million instead of 50 million or whatever the fuck it was, you know, for plodding after a guy in Williams' Skull who didn't even want to engage with you. You'd still have got that money, right? It's the same with Ryan Garcia. I mean, Ryan Garcia, what's he doing on a pay-per-view platform anyway? You know, his best win in inverted commas, is over Haney, which was then called a no contest for reasons that we know about. I won't go into again. And he, well, you know, He's never held a world title. What's his best win? Apart, if you remove the Haney win, what is his best win? What's he doing on a pay-per-view platform? Yeah, well, he's popular. Okay, well, what you mean? He already earns millions of money from millions of pounds or dollars from social media, right? He could get well paid anyway. He wouldn't have to be paid countless millions in a boxing ring. He doesn't deserve to be paid that amount. Now, the great, laissez-faire capitalists will say, well, it's all, supply and demand and blah, blah, blah. Actually, there's something bigger than that matters, and that is boxing in general. Because if you think back to the era of the Klitschko's, the David Haye versus Vladimir Klitschko fight, and I think a probably bigger example is David Haye versus Audley Harrison. They killed pay-per-view in Britain for quite some time, and it was resurrected by Eddie Hearn, the shrewd but ultimately extremely unscrupulous businessman, to whom all is fair in business, like war and business. It was resurrected eventually. You remember that appalling Bellew versus Nathan Cleverly rematch? I mean, the undercard was brilliant, I've got to say, in that for that card. It was a brilliant undercard. But that match, no. I mean, that was just one of the worst pay-per-view main events in living memory. It was eventually resurrected. But the point is, if you've got anything where it's constant gluttony, it's constant, pigs at the trough, but not offering what is perceived to be value for money, then you're going to not just kill pay-per-view, and I have no problem with pay-per-view killing itself, cannibalizing itself, but you're going to harm boxing. And when you harm boxing, that's ultimately got to be a bad thing, right? I don't want boxing to become, a sport where people say, "Oh, those overpaid, boring. It's boring. I'd rather watch UFC. I'd rather watch, I don't know, BKFC or something." I want boxing to continue to be the potentially thrilling, enthralling sport that it can be, that we all know it can be. Now, if you look at something like the Eubank Jr. versus Ben fight, that was a barn burner, a fantastic fight that people will remember for a long, long time. All right. And I'll push aside the fact that neither of those has really proved, certainly Ben has never proved he's world class, even though he might be. Eubank Jr. has been, top 12, top 10 maybe at points in his career. But if you look at the undercard of that fight, that wasn't really pay-per-view value for money. All right. The main event saved that card to a large extent. I mean, it wasn't as bad as, the Times Square card or the recent Riyadh card. But the point I'm making is that boxing matters. Boxing, no fighter. You talk about the face of boxing. This fighter is boxing. No, they're not, because boxing in its current format has been around for 135 years. Okay, no fighter is bigger than boxing. Even Muhammad Ali, Ray Robinson. You talk about them as being absolute legends, which they are. They're not bigger than boxing. Why? Because they've long gone, and boxing is still here. So you need to preserve the sport itself. And when you get absolute gluttony, you sort of, I think it was Lee from Inside the Distance who mentioned this recently when we were having a conversation. He said he doesn't want boxing to become like the Premier League, where it ceases to be a working class endeavour, and you've got the Premier League, and then you've got all the other clubs in the subsequent divisions are sort of struggling to stay afloat. A lot of them are, and they just can't afford to pay anyone. And I don't want that. I don't want this elitist few at the top. Even though again, I'm not a connoisseur of football. I used to follow football 30 years ago before the Premier League. I used to be a real keen football fan. But you do get the occasional brilliant match, like, for example, Barcelona Inter Milan recently. That semi-final of the Champions League was incredible. I watched the first leg when I was in Albania on a big screen outside a restaurant on the green, and they were full of Inter fans for some reason, and it was fantastic to watch. And then the second match was great. So it can produce great matches, all right? But likewise with pay-per-view in boxing, all right? Yes, you get Ben versus Eubank occasionally, but an awful lot of pay-per-views are duds, absolute duds. So why does that model exist? It doesn't have to exist. When Jake Paul and Mike Tyson fought, and I thought that was an obscene circus act. I hated it. But the one thing you can say is that it was through Netflix. So if you had a Netflix subscription, you could watch it. I think they showed it. Didn't they show it on YouTube as well? Anyway, the point I'm making is it wasn't pay-per-view, and yet it generated millions and millions of dollars. Pay-per-view is not the only model that one needs for fighters to make a lot of money. And I repeat, if a fighter only makes $10 million instead of $50 million or more, I couldn't care less. Because yes, you are a fighter. You know, I respect your skills. I respect your courage in getting in the ring. But $10 million, do I need to mention, is a fuck ton of money. And if you are so greedy as to want 50 or 100 million, I'm not on board with you. No. 10 million's enough. 5 million's enough. You know? All right, you have deductions, you have tax, so fucking what? You're still earning more than most people will earn in an entire lifetime. And yes, you are capable of doing something that very, very few people can do. But at the same time, you're still getting paid well. You know? I'm not a laissez-faire capitalist. Never have been, never will be. I don't believe in free trade. I believe in fair trade, you know. So that's a political discussion for another time. But let me know what you think. Give me your opinions on Rolly's comments. Do you think they're paid too much? I'm sort of ambivalent in certain areas, but I definitely think, as I've said, spent the last 5 minutes saying, I think in some cases, yes, they are paid too much. But let me know your opinion. Let me know whether you agree, disagree. If you disagree with me, fine. Say your piece. And also, if you enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new, because we need to build the channel up. And it's your channel as much as mine. So thank you very much for your support. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'll catch you later, and bye for now.